What's cooking, good looking? Hey, I'm back. Okay, so I decided to do something very similar to what I did last week. I know normally I love to mix it up, change it up, which I will be doing next week, but we're going to learn about another classical composer because it's fun and entertaining. And we're also going to be reading out of this book again. Okay, so musical history. Tomaso Giovanni Albinoni. He was not German, he was not Russian, he wasn't even French. He was an Italian composer. He was born June 14th. Some sources say the 8th, not very many. Either way, he was a Gemini. That's what matters. 1671. He was an Italian composer, famous in his day of the Baroque era for Italian operas, but remembered nowadays for his concertos and instrumental music because most of his operas have been lost due to them not being published in his lifetime, as well as more of his work being lost in World War II with the destruction of the Dresden State Library. Publish your music, people. Publish it. He was the son of a wealthy merchant and studied violin and singing, and because of his independent means, he was able to afford to compose music independently, which in turn, unlike other contemporary composers, there's no record of him obtaining a post at either a church or noble court, because the man didn't have to. Johann Sebastian Bach, who was actually 14 years younger, can you imagine that? That's how far back we're going, composed a number of fugues inspired by Albinoni. When he was 50, his career reached its climax when, after dedicating a set of 12 concertos to the Elector of Bavaria, he invited Albinoni to Munich to direct his own operas. Now, how cool is that? It's cool, man. But then, he lived in obscurity the last decade in Venice, the last 2 years of his life being confined to his bed, where he died January 17th, 1751, at the age of 79, of which is now considered to be diabetes. Don't you wonder how many people actually died of diabetes back in the day before they even discovered what it was? Those foods back then too, you know. His output includes operas, concertos, suites, sonatas, symphonies, and solo cantatas. Okay, now that was the music history about Tomaso Giovanni Albinoni. Now we get to learn about history. We're going to be reading again for more shocking secrets in American history, 103 surprising amusing tales by Bill Coate. I'm really liking this book, and I've never had a chance to read this book before, so now I get to read it with y'all, which I love. So we get to read about William Bradford. It is almost impossible to remember the first Thanksgiving and the Mayflower without thinking of William Bradford. This pilgrim leader, pilgrim, that was actually a term that was coined 200 years after this happened. They were known as, I've read before in a couple different things. One referred to them as the old comers, meaning from the old world, but then also they had been referred to as the newcomers as well. But they weren't called pilgrims. In fact, I don't even know if that's a term anymore. Like, that's an outdated term, isn't it? A pilgrim? This pilgrim leader was as firm in his beliefs as Plymouth Rock. He lived a life of unwavering opposition to those who were guilty of adultery, drunkenness, and Sabbath violations, all the fun stuff that we do in our lives. He opposed anyone who was at variance with the ordinances of the Almighty. That's what makes his legacy so surprising. Oh my God, what did he do? William Bradford was born in Yorkshire, England, March 19th, 1590, making him a Pisces. As an adult, he believed so strongly in living the pure life that he left the Church of England to join the Separatists, a branch of the Puritans. After a stay in Holland, Bradford and 101 other Separatists came to America in 1620 and started Plymouth Colony on Massachusetts Bay. So England churches were getting really, really corrupt. And a lot of people were saying, we can't do this. So they went to the Netherlands. They were at the Netherlands for I don't know exactly how long when they said, we can't do this because we don't understand the language. So let's go to the new land and ruin everything there for everybody. Anyway. Oh, also, his wife, when they were, what would you say, like stationed someplace? You know, they weren't moving on the ocean. They were someplace and they were hanging out on an island or whatever. But anyway, she jumped overboard the Mayflower and drowned. And this was a week after her 23rd birthday. They had one kid together. A lot of people think it was suicide. Bradford and his core religionists first elected John Carver to be governor of the colony, but he died a few months later. The colonists then chose Bradford to be their governor, a position he held for 30 years. This is not 30 consecutive years, people, okay? Yes, in a span of 30 years, he had often obtained the seat of governor, but there were other governors in place as well. So that's a little misleading. During his tenure as governor, Bradford had to rule Plymouth Colony with an iron hand, both in secular and spiritual matters. The first winter in the New World, newcomers, right? Oldcomers, the old world. 1620 to 1621 was a terrible one. Freezing cold and disease took a grisly toll. Of the original 102 pilgrims, Bradford had to bury 58 of them before spring. It was only through his strong leadership that the remainder survived to tend to matters of the soul. Okay, yeah, they don't even mention the native people, the indigenous people, that were helping them. Okay, I've read several places that when the Mayflower had arrived in Massachusetts, which was going to be Massachusetts, the indigenous people, the native people there, had looked at them and said, okay, well, wait a minute, they have women and children with them. Something tells me they're not waging war with us. There we go, there it is. Waging a raging war with us. There we go. English people, right? So they helped the colonists. I've read that several places where they said, hey, we'll teach you how to get food for yourself and what's poisonous, what's not, and also how to survive on your own. And they gave them food, the colonists food as well. One place I did read where there was a negotiation that the indigenous people had said to the oldcomers, newcomers, hey, we will do this for you if you protect us from this other tribe. Whether that went down or not, I have not a clue. Just as he nursed the tiny, as you can tell, I do a lot of cross-referencing because I don't want to just do it from one book, or one source, one or two sources. Just as he nursed the tiny colony back to physical health, Bradford also saw to their spiritual welfare, which meant the Pilgrims lived abstemious religious lives. They worked hard, attended simple church services on Sunday, and observed all the rules expected to God's select. Okay. Throughout his tenure, William Bradford would countenance no licentiousness. Why do they use long, hard words? I don't know. Ungodly passions, drunkenness, revels, or carousing. On one occasion, he even broke up a street game of stool ball because it was frivolous and against the conscience that they should play. Stool ball is a British sport that was kind of an ancestor to softball, baseball, cricket. Thus, for 3 decades, did William Bradford lead Plymouth Colony according to a strict moral code. Again, 3 decades of governorship or what? I don't know. Anyway, he was observant to his duties as a Christian to the end, and his spiritual bore fruit for generations, especially among his offspring and their descendants. That then came the 12th century, and it all went downhill. When William Bradford died, May 9th, 1657, at the age of 67, his mantle fell on his son Thomas Bradford and his grandson James Bradford. William's old Puritan ideals were even carried on to some extent in the 4th generation with his great-granddaughter Mary Bradford. After her, however, there was a steady loosening of the moral code in the family until by the time the 1960s rolled around and there was a complete meltdown. By that time, William Bradford's grandson, 8 times removed, had came onto the scene and made his own unique contribution to the social climate of the day, one that would have made his Bradford ancestor turn in the grave. Who is this person? Who is this person? The family lineage of the Puritan legacy of William Bradford came to rest in the person of Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner, who by his own admission rejected his strict religious heritage and invented Playboy magazine instead. One has to wonder what Hefner would say to Grandpa Bradford if only he had the chance. Wow. So William Bradford had 4 kids. The first one didn't have any children. The first one and third one did not have any children. His 4th child had 3 children. But his 2nd child, Lord have mercy, married 3 different times, had 15 children. So most of these people, I'm going to tell you something interesting. Most of these people can claim William Bradford as either their 9th and or 10th grandfather 9 times removed. So what? Great grandfather and great grandfather? And that includes Hugh Hefner, the Baldwin brothers, Julia Child, George Eastman, Clint Eastwood, Sally Field, John Lithgow, and Christopher Reeve. There you go. This has been your music and history lesson. We learned about Tomaso, Giovanni, Albinoni, and William Bradford. I will see you next week when we do something completely different.